All right, welcome back to another Discovering God podcast. And Jeff, welcome.
Hey, thanks. It's good to be back.
Good to have you. Let's continue our conversation from the last time. Slight recap, real quick. This is coming off of a conversation that I had with a friend where I basically asked him, and I ask a number of people this question these days. Are you opposed to faith in general or the organization of faith?
Yeah.
And
what's keeping you from faith?
Right. What's keeping you from faith? Without question, people are more interested, and especially the young generation, much more interested in the story of faith as opposed to the organizational side of faith.
And it's interesting. Post-COVID, there's been a 44% increase. I think this was the Pew Institute. Said there was a 44% increase of people interested in spiritual matters post-COVID.
Yeah.
Among, especially, they said, Z and Y. Is it? Yeah. So the youngest two generations.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. That we'll talk about a little bit about that kind of stuff. But so as I was talking to this guy, the discussion tonight is really on just kind of community. Like, what's your ideal community? When it comes to faith, what would people be looking for? Because I'll start you out with I can't reference it, but there was an article or a stat that I read somewhere where, and it might have been from Breen, or it might have been from like another, one of the other church stat people, not Breen himself, but said, this was years ago, and it said, with the current way that we do church, if it was optimized, like firing on all cylinders, the max penetration that it could reach of like conversion and attendance would be 40% of society.
It's not a great success rate.
Now, I guess like I haven't studied the Malcolm Gladwell stuff of like 15% tipping point.
Yeah.
But that's way above tipping point. But I agree with you. And as I think about it, I'm like, okay, but I don't think the Great Commission lets us off the hook for the 60%.
Right.
That the same article or finding said 60% of the rest of the people, the other 60%, will never darken the door of a church.
Wow.
No matter what. So no matter how good our lighting is, no matter how good our music is, no matter how good our programs are, or what gift our preaching, what gifts we're giving away and gift cards we're giving away for the welcome visitors or whatever on Christmas Eve, or what food trucks we have come in, or what smoke machines we use, or what lighting systems. Nothing.
Yeah.
No programs, no God in Film series, no cars on the stages. It doesn't matter. Those 60% will never come in the door of your church.
Right. No matter how good looking we make it.
Exactly. And so I want to talk tonight just about this idea. Like, what does it seem like people are actually looking for?
Yeah. That's funny. I just met with a guy at work the other day, and at Water Street, how I run chapel or our church service is much how I run it actually right now Sunday mornings at our church, River Corner Church. And that is, we have conversations. And so I'll read through a passage once and just say, what word, what phrase, what image or idea stands out to you? Let them talk about it. And then I'll say, why did it stand out to you? And then I'll offer more of a traditional sermon or sermonette on the backside. But this guy came into my office and he said, I want to get back to the church. But I want it to look like what you're doing and not what the church actually looks like. Can you name those churches? And I was like, are you okay with small house churches, micro movements?
Yeah.
But to your point, would you agree? I mean, is that what people are looking for? A more conversational?
So my short answer would be yes. But I can't say that I know from statistics.
Me neither.
But experientially, in who I'm talking to and how I'm talking, like, yes. So this guy that I was talking to, and I started out, are you disinterested in faith or are you disinterested in the organization? And what he just kind of like went, it was like I struck a vein of gold. Like he just kept going, which was really fun because he was giving me all kinds of information that my mind was processing and thinking about. One of the things he described was basically similar thing. Why can't we just get together, sit down, talk about God's word, and, let's have a discussion. Let's have a dialogue. And he was just describing something so similar to what you're describing, what you say this guy was looking for.
And church missiologists, church, predictors of the future, they say, oh, this is where the church, I've heard them say, this is where the church is going. And do you know what I would argue? I think this is where the church should have been more engaged. I'm not against other models. I think you cannot have too many churches in a town because it takes, different strokes for different folks, right? I mean, there's different flavors for everyone. But I think some of the most successful years of church history have been in these things. You look at the Methodist movement. You look at the Wales movement. I even think we're both in different church movements now, but we share the Vineyard as a shared history for us. I think some of the most fruitful, I hate the word successful, but some of the most fruitful years of community for the Vineyard were both when Ken Gullickson had them meeting in homes and there was these Bible studies that were growing exponentially, but also when Wimber left the Quaker Church and they were having a house study, even in the Quaker Church, when Gunner was meeting with them, he was willing to just Wimber tells, I interrupted every plan he had and asked questions. And, when they were meeting in their homes, in Carl's sister's home, right? I mean, that was a place of praying for each other. There was intimacy. They were singing, sure, but they were also conversing on these things. And that's when God really showed up. I think once it moved into the churches, it was already a different thing. I think the beauty of it was right there. And so I don't want us to think this is where the church is headed. I think this is where the church has always been. Should be in.
Yeah, like I'm not gravitating toward house church.
Right.
Because we need to get back to the biblical model.
And I'm not in a house church, so I'm not arguing that either.
And I'm not saying that I think you're saying that, right? I'm sitting here going, I came out of closing the church down going, I'm not in for performances anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And as if we had a lot of performance. You were there. It was practically no performance.
You were the Ringley brothers. I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. But it's still geared towards something like performance. And I just came away going, and I'm still wrestling through all this. I'm really not in for performance-oriented church.
And neither is the guy that you're talking about either.
Yes, exactly. I came away from that time, we're nearing 2 years, right? I came away from having closed the church going, I think this is where the future is. 2 years, almost 2 years out, I'm less willing to say that, but I'm still not convinced that it's not a viable option.
Right.
And I think it's the viable option for the 60%.
Yeah.
Because they're never going to, I still don't think we're asking the question, what are we going to do about the 60%?
I think that 60% is growing too. I'd be curious to see that.
What's that number today?
Yeah, because, even in the 90s, or maybe it was early 00s, when Lance Pitlock released his book on leadership, Simple Lessons on Leadership, he said that a church consultant told him 30% of your church will leave every year, the size of it, because they're disgruntled with, it's not meeting, I hate this language, meeting their needs or not meeting with what they really need to engage. And so that 60% is growing as people who are now having the permission to say, this system doesn't work for me, are also joining those ranks.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was like this guy just kind of confirmed some things I'm thinking. And he was just kind of speaking his soul. Like, he was just sharing his heart. Like, and it came out of him naturally, where he was basically going, he was saying all but I would come to this. But he was saying, if I was to do something, this is what I would hope it would look like.
Yeah. And I think we have to realize too that so often we're quick to formulate, okay, so let's jump and do those kind of things.
Right.
And then it feels disingenuous as well. And so people are going to be like, no, you've just changed, from a station wagon to a compact car. It's still the same ride, right? It's the Ford Escort 2-door rather than the station wagon.
Right.
And I think that we need to realize this is got to be an authentic, organic conversation where you and I have relational equity. And so that's why we come together, not just okay, we're going to start meeting in homes and promote it as another church in the home.
Right. Like, so when I still am of the opinion that look for that Kairos moment where someone's looking for something and like God's going to breathe on that. So years ago, when I had that small study with the young adults, it all started from next door neighbor going, Mr. Wahlberg, how many times I wanted to just come up to the house and just ask you, can you just talk? I want to ask you questions about the Bible. I was like, well, why didn't you? She's like, well, because you intimidated me. I was intimidated by you, right?
I'm pretty intimidated right now myself.
And it always kind of confounded me, but apparently that's how I came off, right? So anyway, side note. So I said, look, anytime, right? And then we just started meeting. And it was the most life-giving thing with 2 and 3 of them, more so than even actually getting up and doing a sermon. Way more life-giving.
Yeah.
And I don't mean a knock on the church, on our church, and I don't mean a knock on the church and what's going on, on Sunday mornings. I'm not trying to knock that. I feel like we need more people asking the question, how do we do something different?
Yeah.
Wherever people are.
And I love this line in the Chosen series right now. Jesus continues to tell the disciples, get used to different. And again, we talked about this last week, but often one of the things that stops us from changing, that last week it was, how do we listen more, right? How do we move away from our kind of politicized faith? And now we're talking about community, but what stops us from moving into new forms of community often is also fear. It's that slippery slope. If I do this, am I going to lose my faith? If I do this, am I outside of God's plan? Because we've grown up with a model that has been celebrated as the only way of doing things. And so it's hard for us to get used to different.
Yeah.
But I think it's important.
I think that the hard thing too has to do with discipling community.
Yeah.
Like, we can take and do different things. We moved from a Sunday morning to a Saturday night, but we were still, in the end, we were still sort of performance, production, while we said we were trying to do things differently. I wonder.
Literally, that was the slogan.
It kind of,
church doing
for a while
something differently. Yeah.
Tell me what you think of this.
Yeah.
But I think discipling community is a significant difference maker.
Yeah.
And how do we take that into places? Because ultimately, people don't want to are not interested in being spoken at necessarily. They love something substantive and meaningful where they can feel like they're bonding relationally with each other and diving into the word together. Almost like going on a journey of discovery together. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, when you say the word disciple, so the word disciple, Matthias, just means to be a learner, a lifelong learner, somebody who has studied at the side of an elder or a rabbi.
Yep.
But as we're talking about discipleship in a church, I have my ways of defining it, but I'm curious, how would you define it? You said it needs to be an act of discipleship. So how would you define discipleship?
I guess in that context where learning together, growing together in small community. Because one thing I think is a truism of discipleship cannot be done in large numbers.
I agree.
You can't process in mass and get disciples. You're the one with the great Breen quote about that.
Yeah. Breen's quote of, if you try to build a church, you will rarely get disciples. But if you focus on disciple making, you will always get the church.
But it won't be a production.
It won't be.
The follow-up is that it won't be a production.
That's right.
But you get what the biblical expression of church is: community, family, growth.
There's teaching and proclamation that can happen in public squares. Jesus does engage the audiences. When a house movement thing in Acts pours out into the streets and 3,000 people become saved, Peter does stand up and engage the crowds.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't build a church out of those crowds.
Right.
He sends them back out, right? I mean, so I define discipleship as life on life, which is similar to how you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't actually happen in a church only, but in the places that we live, work, and play. So the places that we live, we worship, work, and play. Discipleship needs to be a forerunner in all of that. And I think what stops us from knowing what that looks like or understanding what that even means, which is why I asked you to define it, is because very few of us, maybe 1%, have actually ever been in a true discipling relationship. And everything that we have seen recently trying to rediscover that has either been tossed aside because it's so different, or it's been formulated. And there's a few organizations that I can think of now where discipleship is their heart. That's their intent. It's good intent. But what they're developing is a formulaic program.
Yeah.
And it's not truly life on life in somebody's home, in somebody's places they live, work, and play. Breen, I remember one time telling me, Jeff, discipleship happens when we invite somebody to the grocery store with us. And I was like, wow, that's just a paradigm shift for me.
So, you know Gordon Fee?
Yes.
His son, Craig.
Was that the seminary you were part of?
He was part of Alliance. So I've been talking to Craig a little bit about this and want to talk with him more. But Craig's been doing this up in New York City for a couple decades now.
Wow.
And one thing he shared with me is he shared that very point in his own way. He said, it's just, hey, I'm going to go bring such and such to this person. Why don't you come with me? You know, and hey, it's that follow me in as much as I follow Jesus.
Yeah.
So when I first encountered the Vineyard, an old math teacher of mine from high school, was in the church when I got there years later.
Wow. As
a young adult, right? 19, 20 years old.
It was Einstein.
And he says, hey, I'm going to go pray for this person in the church. You want to come along?
Wow.
And I get there, we're going to go hang out afterward, whatever, together. Why don't you come along? So we get there, we start praying, and I notice he's praying different than I was taught and came up praying in, I'll call it regular church, right? He's praying different. You know what I started doing just because I started hanging with him? You could
actualize yourself in him, see yourself in him in some way.
I started imitating the way he would pray.
Wow.
He was praying for healing for a lady with MS. And he was praying prayers like, be healed in Jesus' name. Come out in Jesus' name. That was nowhere on my grid.
Right.
But because I went with him, I started praying a prayer of command simply because I was close to him. I don't think I've ever actually told him this. But to me, that's the one-on-one, and that's the discipling effect right there.
Yeah.
Right? And he without even trying hard, he multiplied himself into me.
Wow.
And that is to me, the real powerful effect of it. As well, that I think is if we could catch that idea, and if we're able to catch that concept, it's a powerful exponential on the backside. It's not flashy on the front side, and I think there's a lot of parables that can describe that. but it is powerful once the inertia got going.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that kind of community is important. The more we focus, and sometimes what I think, because of our fear, we're fear that something we're doing is failing and how that will reflect on us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We were both part of a church that closed down. It's easy to let things like that reflect on a pastor or a leader or the leadership team if we let it. But none of the original churches who were focused on discipleship
Mm-hmm.
are around today. We find no writings of like, oh man, you let that church plant, on the outskirts of town die. There's not a celebration of how long an institution came. I told our church this Sunday, we're looking at the letter of Thessalonians, and I said, guys, we are an older church. Our church formed in 1760 than any of the original churches.
Yeah.
And I said, that's cool, but it also means sometimes that we've probably developed something that has distracted us away from the original mission as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes discipleship movements happen. I know people that have been meeting in a house church doing what you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
for 20 years.
Yep.
And I know other people that do it for seasons.
Right.
And sometimes it's just for a short moment. You had an experience in Baltimore. Tell us about it.
So Baltimore was interesting. We were down there this summer. Anne Marie and I were out at a restaurant, and we're sitting at the bar, and literally on the other L of the bar was these kids, and we could hear them talking about faith.
Wow.
And I said to Anne Marie, I'm like, do you hear them? She goes, yeah. And I couldn't gauge what the nature and
just got words and
the
phrases.
heart, catching words and phrases and laughter, and they were having a good time. So of course I'm the introvert, but Anne Marie is more the extrovert in that case. She goes up to him.
Wow.
Hey, I hear you talking about God. She starts engaging them. Turns out they had all grown up in church, and they were actually, honestly, they were laughing at how dated it was, and they weren't in high church. They weren't in a Catholic church or Presbyterian church or Episcopal church. They were in
small evangelical.
No, they were in like secret churches.
Oh, okay.
Big.
Yeah.
And they were
Box church, yeah.
And they were basically saying this is just irrelevant anymore. Some Pentecostal, some seeker, this and that, but they were basically going, they got all these ways to try to get you to come, and yet these young people were totally disinterested anymore.
It had no personal value, personal investment, or personal connection to them.
Yes, yeah. And I wish I'd asked them this question that I've been asking young people. If I said to you, you can be part of this organization that has, if you believe what we believe, or God made you to be part of his family and he's wanting you to come back to it or be part of it. God is writing his story and wants you to be part of it. I ask young people that, and I wish I asked them that.
Yeah.
But whenever I ask a young generation the X and Y, every single one of them, oh, the family story thing, that gets me right here. And so I don't mean that, like you said, I don't mean that this is not like something against big and only big. It's just kind of going,
what kind of community actually connects with people?
Yeah. Yeah. And the 60% that don't want to come in the door anymore.
Yeah.
What are we doing about that?
And let's face it, I bet if we polled pastors, and you and I are both pastors, we've been pastors for a while, there are times that we get disgruntled or disillusioned with the system. The system, and I don't mean that negative, systematic, I'm not trying to talk badly about the church, but there are, foundational pieces of running an organization that are true in the church as well. And that's stress. I mean, getting the right sermon every week, making sure that you're caring for people correctly, that you're living God's goodness to others, all that. I mean, there is stress in maintaining something like that.
Yeah.
And I bet if we asked most pastors, what do you want out of the church? It would be very close to what those 60% want. And I say that carefully because there's an article that's going around online right now.
Okay.
I don't know if you saw it, where a pastor has left his pastorate and says, why I've given up on the church. And from what I can tell, he hasn't given up on faith. He kind of hinted at it maybe, but basically he rants for 3 pages, it feels like, of why the church is stuck in the old days, why the community doesn't matter. And this is what I continue to hear. They couldn't get on board with my ideas. They couldn't change with the way that I needed to see them change. And I'll face it, early on in my ministry, there was some of that in me as well. Like as a prophetic person, I can see some things that need to change. Sometimes we try to lead too much, but he rants on the church, then proposes a new idea, and then pretty much advertises himself as a forerunner of that new idea. And as I read that, I was like, and this is the thing that this pastor alone realizes something's broken, but he doesn't realize also that some of that's his. So I'm not saying guys, I'm not ditching on the church in the way that this guy did just to put ourselves up as something better. Because I'm in an old church that still looks very institutional. We're trying to do things differently. And I think for our context, that works. But that's what we're talking about. There's not one way or a right way, but community needs to be contextualized. In the same way that you and I are to carry the gospel or the good news and the goodness of God, our communities are to do that in a contextualized way. It's why Thessalonians and Galatians look different. It's why, when Peter writes to his disciples and John writes to his, there's similarities. There's doctrinal conviction similarities, but the way that looks is contextualized. There's not one church model. I remember reading a book years ago that said, this is the only way to run church. You need elders like this. And then Frank Viola did some great work called Reimagining the Church, where he basically disproved that there's one singular church model.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. I'm not upholding, you're not upholding one singular way. But we're asking, how can our communities morph, change in a way that they meet people and people are hungry for it? That's what we're finding.
The 2 things as we'll begin to wrap this up. One, I wish I could find this picture. It was on Facebook probably around 2013, 2014, something like that. I've never forgotten it, but I can't find it save my life. It was a picture of Ash Wednesday, and it was a Catholic priest in full black and white collar.
Yeah.
And out on the streets with ashes, basically offering ashes to people on the street, smiling big, people interacting, smiling, loved it. And what I saw in that guy was he basically is saying, it's okay. We don't need to just wait for you to come to us. If you need it, we'll bring it to you. And I find that so much more in keeping with the gospel, which is a sent
72
message, right? To where people are. How much have we been saying? Have we been saying too much?
Community
we'll wait till you come here, and so I've been thinking about this, and it's kind of a interaction of words and a phraseology that I've been coming up with and working on. But we become comfortable with one expression, but many beliefs. I'm beginning to believe that the gospel is proclaimed through many expressions of one belief.
Wow.
And so what I mean by that is, for me, what does that specifically mean? One expression, everything has to do with Sunday mornings. Many beliefs. Everybody's divided into their denominations. Instead, I do think the kingdom and the gospel, when we proclaim it, it can have many expressions out where people live, work, and do life.
Isn't that what Paul's saying in Romans when he says, so we being many are one body?
Yes.
Many, the differentiation there,
And yet, really what we're proclaiming is one message.
Yep.
The gospel of the kingdom, Jesus is Lord. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder, that 60%, still needs the gospel. And like, is it an either or? No. But I think it would take many, many expressions. And I think God would be God would be completely fine with it.
Yeah.
Why am I not doing it? I could beg out and say, well, I'm not really evangelistic. That's not a good enough answer. I don't have an answer.
I think it's inappropriate to act out until you have a vision of what God's calling you to.
And that is probably where I'm at, you know, personally. But anyway, what do you think? Finishing up, what do you think?
In closing, there's something I want to say if I can. Just
Please,
take a minute or two. There's a book, Safe Churches. I can't remember the authors right now. They're psychiatrists. But they talk in their book called Safe People on how to also identify safe church. And so for those of you that are in that 60% that I believe in God, I want to have conversations about faith, don't know where to land, this is what they offer. Make sure you find a place where grace is preached from the pulpit and is the foundation for how all people are treated. So that's a healthy community, a place where community is going to matter to you. 2, truth is preached without compromise, but also without a spirit of law and judgment. 3, the church leaders are aware of their own weakness and are open about their hurt, their pain, their failings, their humanity. Instead of having it all together, right, there's a vulnerability that's modeled. The church uses small groups rather than a large thing to touch people's lives, and sermons focus on community just as much as doctrine, so how to live together. The culture is one of forgiven sinners, not self-righteous religious. The church is being a self-contained unit, thinking it has all the answers. Stay away from those, but look for those who are networked in the community. Right? Make sure there's a relational emphasis as much as a vertical one, a horizontal as much as a vertical. Make sure the teaching sees brokenness, struggle, and inability as normal parts of the process of faith. In fact, John Wimber quote I came across today said, salvation isn't something we hold on to. It's something we work out over our lifetime. And churches have personalities and culture, and it's possible to find churches that actually do fit a safe place for you to journey. And I think when people say to me, I want to find a place where community really matters, they want a place where they can actually be safe, vulnerable, transparent. We know what it's like to belong in public space, social space somewhat, but it's scary to belong in a personal space where we're really known, where we kind of take off some of the calluses, the mask, and share things. But people want that. And make sure, guys, when you go looking for it, you're choosing a place that's safe for you.
Yeah. That's a good word. I think it's good to end on that. And just to maybe reiterate one more time, like, we're not trying to bag on the current state of the church, the current way we do church largely. It's just sort of trying to make an observation about, from within the context of where is society today, and what about that percentage of people that just are no longer even going to come. So without we don't have total answers or solutions.
We're just creating a conversation.
We're just trying to have conversation. And thank you for joining us. And if you are benefiting from from just joining us and being part of this, then please give us a like and a share. Share it out. Help us get the word out. And that would be much appreciated. We do hope that you can encounter God by being in His Word. Come face to face with Him as you come face to face with His Word.